For somebody like me who's more interested in video than photography, the A9 Mark III is more like a proof of concept and the promise of this technology being introduced into future cameras. Sony announced the A9 Mark III at a live event in Japan. I'm not in Japan, I'm in Tennessee. That's unfortunate, but I wanted to talk about the A9 Mark III, what it means for video, what's new, what's innovative, if it's something that you should be thinking about, or if it means more in terms of what might come down the pipeline later on. First of all, this is going to be a $6,000 hybrid camera, the A9 Mark III. It's a lot more expensive than previous A9 models launched at. I think they launched more in like the $4,000 range. So this is quite a bit more expensive and puts it right there where the A1 launched. It's typically not been a camera that videographers pay much attention to. Obviously, it can shoot video, but that was very much a secondary function of previous A9 cameras. This camera is also being primarily targeted towards fast action sports photographers. The innovation of a full frame global sensor has a ton of implications for photography, for this camera's intended use case. But I'm more interested in what it means in terms of video. What's the deal with the global shutter? Why is that even important or interesting? A global shutter, in contrast to a rolling shutter, reads out the entire image all at once. A rolling shutter reads it out from top to bottom. We've all seen those whip pan tests as people just whip the camera back and forth, and you can see what should be straight lines bending and swaying back and forth. That's because it's reading the top first and the bottom last. You don't even have to be panning the camera or whipping the camera back and forth to see rolling shutter artifacts. It could be anything that's moving across the frame relatively quickly. Really, how fast the thing has to be moving in order to see the rolling shutter artifacts is going to depend on how fast that sensor is able to read from top to bottom. As far as I know, this is the first global shutter camera that is aimed at photography, but there have been many global shutter cameras that are aimed at video or cinema. The current and relevant one is the Red Komodo and the Red Komodo X. Prior to the Red Komodo, the downside of having a global shutter and why they weren't typically used is worse image quality, much worse dynamic range. I've not personally used a Komodo, but all the videos that I've seen that compare the Komodo versus other Red cameras and versus other cameras in general, it seems like the Komodo has very comparable image quality and dynamic range to the rest of Red's rolling shutter cameras. Obviously, I can't talk about what the image quality of the A9 Mark III is like. I'm going to be interested to see how well the image quality and the dynamic range of the A9 Mark III stack up to comparable cameras. It could be comparable in terms of price, so maybe that's the Alpha 1, Canon R3, Nikon Z9, or maybe it's comparable in terms of resolutions. Anything else with around a 24.6 megapixel sensor or a 6K sensor for video. Is rolling shutter even a big deal? Obviously, there's super high-end cinema cameras from Red, from Arri, from Sony that have rolling shutter. And these cameras cost $50,000, $100,000, and they're used on the highest-end productions, movies, commercials, and they all have rolling shutter to some degree or another. So it's clearly not the end of the world, right, to have some rolling shutter from a camera sensor. However, if the goal of video cameras and digital cinema cameras in particular is to get to a quality that resembles or surpasses film cameras, because obviously a film camera does not have the same limitation or the same issue of reading the image from top to bottom. It's capturing the light all at once. Obviously, this doesn't mean that everybody needs to go out and buy an A9 Mark III for the purposes of shooting video or making movies. It's still a $6,000 camera, which I guess in terms of movie production is pretty cheap, but in terms of video production for the most of us, it's pretty expensive. Because aside from the global sensor, there's not really much new here that we haven't already seen in a lot of Sony Alpha cameras or even the FX cameras. For example, there's still only 4K recording. So even though you're getting a 6K sensor, it's going to be oversampling or downsampling into a 4K resolution. It's also 10-bit 422, and they mentioned specifically 10-bit 422 all intra. I don't know if that means that in XAVC-S or XAVC-HS that it's not 10-bit 422, but we'll have to wait and see what that's like. This is giving you 16-bit raw output like we've seen on many Sony cameras, but what that actually means is that you're gonna get a 12-bit ProRes RAW when you pair this with an Atomos recorder. This has a version of the AI chip that was introduced in the A7R5, and that is in the ZVE1 and the A6700. And with that, you're getting that dynamic active mode stabilization, which up until this point I think is only in the ZVE1. That's going to give you a pretty heavy crop, but super, super stable footage, almost gimbal-like. All of that is stuff that we've already seen. The one new thing in terms of video with the A9 Mark III is 4K 120 with no crop whatsoever. Up until now, the best that we've seen is in the A7S III and the FX3, FX6, with a 4K 120 mode with a slight 10% crop into the sensor. And the reason that you're getting that 10% crop on those three cameras is that it's taking the slight oversample of about 4.2K that you get from those cameras to get to 4K, instead just going right into 3840 by 2160 or 4096 by 2160 to give you that 4K 120. For somebody like me who's more interested in video than photography, the A9 Mark III is more like a proof of concept and the promise of this technology being introduced into future cameras, hopefully less expensive cameras down the line. Maybe an A7S Mark IV or an FX3 Mark II or an FX4, whatever it ends up being called, will utilize either the same 6K global shutter, or maybe they'll stick with a 12 megapixel sensor, but hopefully a global shutter sensor. I'd also hope that any cameras that feature a sensor like this from Sony that are focused on video will start to include many more video-focused features that other manufacturers already have in their cameras, to include things like open gate, the readout of the full sensor for video. I'd like to see more raw video options, and I know Red has the whole internal raw recording thing kind of on lockdown. And I know a lot of the manufacturers probably don't want to go to court with Red to fight through that limitation, but we know that you can do external raw recording because we have ProRes RAW from Atomos and Blackmagic. So why don't we have Blackmagic RAW output from the Sony cameras? Internal RAW recording is probably a no-go for the foreseeable future, but I don't think there's anything stopping them from doing 12-bit internal compressed codecs. Let me know what you think. Is this something you're excited about? Do you think it represents an actual innovation? How much does rolling shutter matter to you? I'd be curious to know. Anyway, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you in another video.